Is there on now? Oh, I'm not like Colleen. Everybody always says they can't hear me without a mic, so here we go. All right. The plan was to talk, and I have no idea how long, so I'm going to just cut part of it. We'll just start through, and then when we get out of time, we'll switch to the finale, summary at the end. So don't worry, that won't go too far. Okay, I want you to think about education a little bit differently than you have, and so that's the purpose of this part of the conversation. According to Aristotle, the purpose of education is to produce a great soul. In this book, The Eden Conspiracy, I've got a few of these books up here in case you want to look at them afterward. Joe Harless wrote about how we produce, how we measure what we produce, and he said education should be about producing an accomplished citizen, so it should teach the knowledge, skills, and information relevant to becoming accomplished members of society. So in other words, good citizens. What does that look like? It should include obedience to laws, informed voting decisions, contributions to stability, resolution of interpersonal conflict, and contributions to community improvement. There's nothing about jobs in there, but there is a whole lot about what we're here for today as members of society, why we meet together and why we work on the things that we do. In the Northwest Ordinance, 1787, that's the same year that the Constitution was written. They set up a plan for surveying new areas that were going to be joining the country, and they set up anyway, in that, it talks about the purpose of education. So religion, morality, and knowledge being necessary to good government and the happiness of mankind, schools and the means of education shall be forever encouraged. So that particular thing did not mean that the government was in charge of education. It was interested in it and wanted to encourage it. What it actually did was, after the land was surveyed, 1/16 or 4/36 of any township were given as a grant for the county or that township to sell the land and use the proceeds for building schools or whatever other infrastructure they needed for their local schools, however they took care of them. And most of them in those days were private schools. And those proceeds had to be used in that township, so everything was local, and it was also a way of transferring government land to private ownership. So there was no state or national oversight and no ongoing support. In the Thomas Jefferson Education, it's a book by Oliver DeMille, I went to a homeschool conference once, and I already had this book, but I found it on a bookshelf in one of the vendors' sections, and he came up to me and sort of whispered, "That's the most subversive book in this room." It might be, even in a homeschool setting, but it talks about the purpose of education and the types of education. So there are 3 types of education. We're going to talk about those just a little bit: public, professional, and leadership. So public education is for laborer preparation. It teaches what to think. And the purpose is to give opportunities to the poor, to lift them out of being a burden on society. It was first tried in America with the intention of getting immigrants. We had a lot of Irish immigrants at that particular time in the big cities, and during the Industrial Revolution, their parents would be working in factories, and the kids had no one to take care of them, and they'd be wandering the streets. So it was a way of handling that problem. The downside of public education, which is free to the poor, is that no one can compete with free, and so it tends to degrade the other levels of education. Professional education is trade apprenticeships or professional training, law, medical, MBA. It teaches when to think, so under what circumstances they should use their specialized training. The purpose is to create expertise, and it meets this goal, but it doesn't provide for leadership. So leadership training produces leaders in homes and communities, entrepreneurs in business, statesmen in government, teaches how to think. So we have what to think, when to think, how to think. It trains thinkers, entrepreneurs, and statesmen. It develops character, competence, capacity to do the right thing and do it well in business, government, church, school, family, and other organizations. It perpetuates freedom. So you can see that what we need is leadership education. All right, here's some history of education. Home tutoring, followed by trade apprenticeship and professional training. That has been the standard for education for about 6,000 years, until about 100 years ago. The poor would get minimum training to be useful, and that would emphasize physical labor over brain power. That's a drawback. We want to be able to deal with that. And I want to assure you that I do believe everyone should have an education. I just disagree with how we should get to that point. Okay, so back in the mid-1800s, there was a man named Horace Mann. He was an atheist, progressive. This is what he said. What the church has been for medieval man, the public school must become for democratic and rational man. God will be replaced by the concept of the public good. The common school shall create a more far-seeing intelligence and a pure morality than has ever existed among communities of man. He wanted it to replace the churches. It started in cities, and within 2 generations it was flooded across the nation. He used a factory model, so rather than integrating all of the subjects, which had been done previously, they separated it out. Math is separate from English, is separate from geography, is separate from science. And the timing was set by ringing of bells, just like in the factories. So you stop learning this when that bell rings. It's authoritarian from the top, and uniformity is much more important than creativity or innovation. Following him, we have John Dewey, and he's the same John Dewey that we have from the Dewey Decimal System. I think we can thank him for that. We'll be generous. In 1916, he wrote a book called Democracy in Education. He called this progressive education, and we are using the term progressive the way Woodrow Wilson used it and the way Hillary Clinton used it. It was a change, so self-realization became the goal rather than learning. He gave only casual nod to English grammar, history, geography, ancient history, the classics, and science. So all of those things, they might touch on them in school, but they didn't actually teach them the way they did. With our founding fathers, they learned how to read Greek and Latin so they could read the original texts of Aristotle and whoever in their original languages. I don't have that kind of education. I did with my kids do some basic roots in Latin and Greek to help with that, because you can understand a lot more vocabulary if you know those roots, but they actually had to learn them before. It was his decision not to have those classics even taught anymore. He looked upon the schools as a wonderful opportunity to indoctrinate America's youth in the virtues of a glorious age where private property, the free market, open competition, and profits would be eliminated. Eliminated. His background, he got a PhD at Johns Hopkins studying under a man named Stanley Hall, who was a disciple of a German socialist named Wilhelm Wundt. He visited the Soviet Union in the 1920s and looked around and saw utopia there and came back and described it that way. So he missed the revolutionary desolation and the widespread destruction of human values that were on display there. He didn't even notice that. He just described it as a popular culture impregnated with aesthetic quality, as though he knew what aesthetics even meant if he said that. There was a man, a contemporary of his, who saw through it, and he said, the disappearance of great books from education and from the reading of adults constitutes a calamity. In this view, education in the West has been steadily deteriorating. The rising generation has been deprived of its birthright. The mess of pottage it has received in exchange has not been nutritious. Adults have come to lead lives comparatively rich in material comforts and very poor in moral, intellectual, and spiritual tone. He was trying to be nice because he was a contemporary of his. They worked at the same teachers' college, and almost every teachers' college, there was a certain point where Columbia Teachers College provided the education that went on to spread it out through the nation. So at one point, every superintendent in the country had come within a generation of Columbia Teachers College and John Dewey. I want to read you, this is from the novel To Kill a Mockingbird. And there's a little girl named Scout who talks about her education. And it talks about a lot of other things in that book as well, but there's a couple of excerpts of her education. She's both precocious and observant, but also innocent. So here's what she says. Scout's teacher discovers that she only knew the alphabet. She not only knew the alphabet, but she could read better than all the readers, and she could read the Mobile Register, which was their newspaper, that she'd been doing naturally at home by sitting with her father while he read the newspaper. So the teacher says, "You tell him I'll take over from here and try to undo the damage." "Ma'am, your father does not know how to teach. You can have a seat now." I mumbled that I was sorry and retired, meditating upon my crime. I never deliberately learned to read, but somehow I had been wallowing illicitly in the daily papers. Apparently John Dewey was to blame, and she goes on and blames him. The remainder of my school days were no more auspicious than the first. Indeed, they were an endless project that slowly evolved into a unit in which miles of construction paper and wax crayon were expended by the state of Alabama in its well-meaning but fruitless efforts to teach me group dynamics. What Jem, that's her brother, called the Dewey Decimal System was school-wide by the end of my first year, so I had no chance to compare it with other teaching techniques. I could only look around me. Atticus, that's her father, and my uncle, who went to school at home, knew everything. At least what one didn't know, the other did. Furthermore, I couldn't help noticing that my father had served for years in the state legislature, elected each time without opposition, innocent of the adjustments my teacher thought essential to the development of good citizenship. Jim, educated on a half-decimal, half-dunce cap basis, seemed to function effectively alone or in a group, but Jim was a poor example. No tutorial system devised by man could have stopped him from getting at books. As for me, I knew nothing except what I had gathered from Time magazine and reading everything I could lay my hands on at home. But as I inched sluggishly along the treadmill of the Macomb County school system, I could not help receiving the impression that I was being cheated out of something. Out of what, I knew not. Yet I did not believe that 12 years of unrelieved boredom was exactly what the state had in mind for me. I think that was written in the 1940s. So let's rethink what's normal. 6,000 years of human history, children have been brought up and taught by their parents. Turning that responsibility over to the state is a social experiment, an undeniably failing experiment began only a little over a century ago. While we homeschoolers may look radical to the people around us who don't know anything different from the government institutional factory-like schools they grew up with, we're the ones following the traditional pattern. Just as an example, as homeschoolers, we would often go to the Capitol and lobby for certain issues, and I started in 2003 with that effort, and I think every session we worked on the UIL issue, the Interscholastic League. It started in 1913 when most of the state, more than 90% of the state, was homeschooled or private schooled. So it was not intended for public schools. That wasn't the purpose that it was created for. But by the 1960s, public schools had so far taken over that they absolutely eliminated all private schools and homeschoolers from being able to participate. So we've been trying to get that back ever since, what was intended for us. So we pay taxes, we pay for the schools, we pay as well for our own education, and then we're deprived of the things that were prepared for us in the first place. I was just pointing that out so that you would notice that at the time that it was instigated, public schools were not a thing in Texas. They were a minor part. Oliver DeMille in the Thomas Jefferson Education. In the history of education, the current American model is a very non-traditional, very different from what has been done for generations. Almost everybody in America is getting the kind of education that has typically been reserved for those who simply had no other options. Remember we talked about public, professional, and leadership education? We're making everybody have public. It's hard to compete with free. So it's not just the poor, the middle class, and even the upper classes are mostly getting that public education, and by that I mean specifically they're getting education that had been intended for laborers who needed to be told what to do and what to think. The result is that nobody's being prepared to lead. Somebody's leading, and they don't think the way we do. A highly trained and undereducated people are always easily swayed. I'm going to skip this story. The point of the story, I did a research on a classroom that we had when we had our kids in public school. It was very different from, it was a good school. We had multi-age in the classroom, and when I did the research on it, it turned out that everything they did that emulated a family environment made for better education. We don't need to reproduce schools at home, and we don't. Some homeschoolers do, we did not. We're better off reproducing the homes of our founding fathers. So expertise made its way into education. That's what that teacher was telling Scout in the book. Your father doesn't know how to teach, so overlooking the fact that he'd already taught her how to read, you don't know what you're doing, let me take over and do the right way. Do any of you need somebody to come into your home to teach your child how to walk? No, you don't. So why do you need them to teach somebody else to come in and teach them how to count, how to add, how to subtract, how to multiply, when you know how to do those things? Those three areas, certification, what does it guarantee? It does not guarantee teacher quality. It eliminates competition. And an example, okay, well, I already showed that an example. So accreditation, there is zero correlation between accreditation and the quality of education. It's related to certification of teachers, number of books in the library, number of days per year, and number of hours per day. That's what they're looking at to decide whether a school is accredited or not. It has nothing to do with the outcomes that they provide for the students. So when they call private schools and homeschools unaccredited, it's irrelevant. Okay, you need to know who's doing the accrediting and what criteria do they use. Because if they're using, this school has a certain number of bathrooms and they have them integrated, things that we don't want, but that's what they decide has to count. There was an accreditation process for a law school that required the constitutional law class to teach that the Roe v. Wade decision had been the correct decision. And the teacher or the constitutional law professor that told me about that said I had to tell them I couldn't teach anymore if that was going to be required, because it's not true. Everybody knows it's not true. Even Ruth Bader Ginsburg says it was a bad decision. Not that she didn't like the outcome, she did, but the thought process that went through it was bad. And accreditation can cause that to happen. So I have an agenda, and they have an agenda, and they're at odds. I want to get the best education for my own children. They want at best, they want positive educational outcomes for the highest percentage of children. Their agenda might be making sure no child gets a better opportunity than all others. No child left behind. is really No Child Gets Ahead. And because I had gifted students in my family, which is a special ed issue, mine were held back and they were not. You've seen it happen here because I've buttonholed a few of our speakers on this. When they come in and they say, we want to make sure every child gets the education to reach their potential, I pin them down and ask them that question, and it turns out they always mean they're looking at the low-income children who have been poor performing and they don't have the parent support, and they will ignore my children because they're going to be fine. Trust me, I'm an expert, ought to be a red flag. So curriculum, I used to be a curriculum writer. It's been a while, but I know what curriculum is in the mind, and I know what it actually is now that I can create my own. It's usually about creating textbooks, right? But it's actually, there's a definition for it. It must be, and this is in the Texas Code, and we'll talk about, I probably won't talk about it, but anyway, books, workbooks, video, monitor, something physical that they can encounter. So it's not just a person and what's in their head and saying it to them. There has to be something physical. And the curriculum must include the basic subjects of reading, spelling, grammar, mathematics, and good citizenship. And that's required of all homeschoolers, but it might be that they're the only ones that really pay attention and accomplish that. Remember what the purpose of good citizenship is: obedience to the law, informed voting decisions, contributions to civility, those things that we looked at before. That's what's required, that they're not actually teaching. When it's used in public schools, the way that they choose them, the way that a publication happens, it has to bring the greatest income for the publisher, so they're going to look at California and Texas because those are the biggest buyers, and everybody else has to kind of fit into to what those two states want. And California has a lot more influence than Texas does. And the greatest control for whoever wants it to be produced or implemented. What you don't get is flexibility for the students, choice for the parents, or even individual classroom teachers, which is exactly what Gordon said. So, we're not going to have time to talk very much about actual homeschooling here, but the Leaper versus Arlington decision in 1987 was groundbreaking. The ruling said that homeschools are private schools, unaccredited private schools, and therefore not regulated, do not require teacher certification or third-party curriculum approval, and are exempt from compulsory attendance laws. Okay, so we're a free country in Texas. And that was the model that many other states have used. There are other states that have some oversight and more control than we do, but we're the free country that started it. And I can tell you that Texas Homeschool Coalition spends a great deal of time, energy, and treasure lobbying the legislature to keep us free, because it takes a lot of energy. Homeschooling is not rocket science, but one of the families that was involved in the Leaper decision, she actually was a NASA scientist. She had been accepted into the program to become an astronaut, but her children needed her. They couldn't get what they needed in the schools. The result for them was their children, the two oldest boys, were 2 to 3 years behind in most of their subjects. She homeschooled for a year as an experiment. They retested them, they were 2-3 years above. That's how badly the public schools were holding them back. Homeschool stats, 2.3 million in the US, going up to 8% a year. 74% of homeschooled students attends college compared to 26% of non-homeschooled students. So non-homeschooled would include private schools. The numbers in Texas, we don't count them here, so these are estimates that I was able to get what I think is a pretty good generalization. About 2.6% of school-age eligible children are homeschooled. Some other stats, this is from the Texas Homeschool Coalition website. above average on SAT and ACT scores. So socialization is the big question, and all I can tell you is that who is it that socializes best of these? It's not a trick question, you all know the answer to that, that parents are better at socializing their kids than immature, undeveloped peers. My kids, all of them, their socialization got much better once we started homeschooling. There are plenty of opportunities that we have for homeschooling. There are benefits to joining a group, and we started with a group, and we ended up starting our own group in end of 2005, and that group is still going. We homeschooled from 2010 to 2000 until 2010, so it's been 9 years since I did it. And I was going to go through our story, but there's not time to go through our story, and that's what would take the most time anyway, because you get me started on our story, and whoa, I go on for hours. But these are the kiddos. 3 of them, all of them ended up gifted. We moved to Houston, and we're here almost 2 years in the public schools when we just hit one brick wall after another, and so many things that brought out my mama bear and made me angry, and I think about them and it still happens. The anger just comes up. So we did Shakespeare every year. I started that and directed for the first 6 years. That's still going. We did a spelling bee. I did that for 5 years. And the last year, my daughter was the district second place, which means she didn't have to keep studying, but she was that close to going on to the state tournament. We do field trips. Science, we usually do it together with other people, and she got more opportunities in science than I had growing up. A lot of field trips, camps. We did team leadership training. I started that. That's still going. Team camps, annual, monthly activities. They were so activity out. It was an exhausting decade for me, but so fun. Working with teams who have a good attitude and want to be there is an extraordinarily fun thing to do. We spent a lot of time at the state legislature. That's my daughter lobbying up there in the corner, meeting the governor. In 2003, we went and lobbied together, and they were with me when I testified for DOMA. And then our representative at that time was Gary Elkins, and he invited our family up to meet the governor. We did graduations for our kids. They got actual certificates that we made that qualify. The oldest graduated from Baylor Law. The second one graduated in economics and went to the Army and graduated from the Defensive Language Institute, had 2 deployments to Korea, and is now out of the Army and back in school. He's getting an accounting master's degree. And my daughter graduated and then went in family science, specializing in home ec, sewing and fashion design, and then decided she wanted to expand that to interior design. She just finished a 2nd degree in July and is starting her first career job. So they're doing fine. We did not kill them off. The outcomes for me were, I can't even tell you how valuable they were for me. Those are the families that we started homeschooling with, and we met together just a couple years ago. I hadn't seen each other together for a while, so that's kind of fun. We've remained good friends over the years. Those are among my best friends. And then I have my kiddos and my grandkids, and we still do those things together. Right now, none of my grandkids are being homeschooled. Unless I can squeeze some things in there, I actually do distance piano lessons with my granddaughter, and I've sent them math studies and a few other things. You do what you can, but when both parents have to work, it's pretty rough. I want to get to the costs here, so do you have it? I loved being with my kids. I didn't want summer to end because that would mean the fun together would end. If that's how you are, you might be right for homeschooling. It doesn't take as much brain power as you expect. We didn't go in with fear. My husband has a master's degree in education, and I was a curriculum writer and had taught college level writing classes, so it was not scary for us to do it, and it is for some, but I promise you that some of the best teachers I've known didn't even have their college degree. Cost breakdown, I just did this for you, and I probably missed a few things, but just to give you a comparison. So we homeschooled for 10 years, that's a total cost. So the average per year is about $333. I might have missed a few things. If you did it $500 a year, why does it cost me $500 a year and it costs the state $10,000? Resources that I recommend: Texas Homeschool Coalition, a national organization, Homeschool Legal Defense Association. I know less about because I was so involved with Texas Homeschool Coalition. Most of what they provide is free. I did have membership for several years because we needed insurance and backup because we had a homeschool organization. You can go to their sites and find out how to start. Practically any question you have. The entire story of homeschooling is a documentary about the Leeper family and the Jackson family and others that were involved in that case. And that's online on their site. You can get the whole documentary there. They provide other links that are endless. And then I made up this list a few years ago, so it may have changed. You could probably find it much bigger now. These are the kinds of things that are free or almost free that you can get an education and probably even a college education online without paying a cent. The Hillsdale College online courses, I've taken them all. I think there are close to 24, and they're excellent, and they cost nothing. I feel guilty about not sending in money. One of these days I will, because they definitely deserve it. But anyway, for free, and we are getting, the more technology is the way that it is, the more options are available for low cost, and yet the more school prices are going up and the quality is going down. Some questions we could ask, but I just want to say in closing, one of the, I'm going to lose my train of thought, questions to ask. This is something that I often say on my blog: whenever government attempts something beyond the proper role of government, which is protection of life, liberty, and property, it causes unintended consequences, and usually they are exactly opposite to the stated goals of the interference. If we want educated children, and government isn't entitled to do that, we definitely need the federal government out of the way. And then we need something much closer to home than our state. So as we talk about that, as you listen, you can see a lot of that in play with what Colleen said, but in addition, what we're going to talk about next month, think about that when you hear those things. Can you fix it? My personal preference would be to abolish it entirely and go free market plus philanthropy. I don't know how, that's such a radical idea that I accept the fact that in my lifetime we probably can't persuade people to do that without the thing crashing first. And I don't really want to see that happen. I don't want any years of children going uneducated. But already it would be possible to educate everyone almost for free. And we need to find ways to make that happen. The response I have all the time here whenever we talk about an outstanding issue is yet another reason to homeschool. Okay, thank you.
Okay, let's let our two speakers just kind of take